Okay, I'm pleased to turn this meeting over to George Kramer, our moderator. George?
Good morning. I guess good afternoon for all you folks out on the wrong coast. Us folks here on the left coast, it's about 9 o'clock in the morning. It's wonderful to be here. I'm glad to see you all. I only have one rule, and that is ask questions. You can jump out at me if you'd like, or send it to Sally. She never has a problem interrupting me. Our guest author today is Mike Black. Mike is from the Chicago, Illinois area. He's a retired police officer from a suburban department. He's been writing for, I'm not sure how long, but he has a mere 40 plus books out in a variety of genres. One of my favorite is a historical novel about Bass Reeves, a Black U.S. Marshal. But Mike, tell us a little bit more about yourself. And then, I really do want you to ask questions, folks. This is a book club, and your questions are important. Plus, I run out of breath after about 20 minutes. Anyway, Mike, tell us about you and your writing, please.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me, Sally and George. Hello to John, my president of the PSWA. We're working on our PSWA conference, which takes place in Las Vegas in July, and hope you'll all consider attending. As far as my writing, you asked me when I started writing. I wrote my first short story in the 6th grade, and I detailed that experience in an essay. We have a Writer's Digest book called How I Got Published, and I call it a 6th grade education. The teacher at the time, I kept badgering her to let me write a short story, and she did. And when I read it in front of the class, she told me never to do it again. So I took that as inspiration and continued writing.
All right. Tell us a little about Chimes.
Chimes at Midnight. I actually wrote this one, I think back in, I think it came out in 2013. Then they re-released it in paperback about a year or two ago. It was originally suggested by my agent at the time. He wanted me to write a thriller involving some political intrigues in Washington, and I came up with the basics of the plot. I've always been a big fan of Fletcher Knebel, and he wrote a novel, I think it was back in the 50s or 60s, called 7 Days in May. And it was about the military trying to take over the government. So I had an idea that I wanted to kind of emulate that theme, and I came up with Chimes at Midnight.
7 days a day. Did you have something? Somebody raised a question? Nope. You mentioned political. How do you dance around that or handle that in your work? I've known you for many years, and I have no idea what your politics are, and I never want to know. I just want to know about your writing. So how do you dance around that?
Well, sometimes it isn't easy. I was on a police officer for 30 some years, and I was taught in the police academy that it's best to be apolitical and not, especially when you're working. And I've carried it over to my writing. I think there's a place for injecting certain social causes into your writing, but I think if you have to kind of mix them into the fiction, and if you try to write something that's overtly political, it ceases to become fiction, in my opinion. It becomes more of a political tract. For an example, you think back in the novel The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Sinclair was a socialist, and he wrote the book about the problems of immigrants and the meatpacking plants in Chicago in the early 20th century. And the book starts out as a story about a family, and then it kind of goes into being more of a tract for socialism. Compare that to The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck's book about the Okies going west during the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. And the reason that book succeeds where The Jungle, I think, doesn't, is that it was about the family. It never loses track of the family and the struggles that they had. So it wasn't the struggles were sort of cast in the background, but more or less the family is what you're concerned about with the Grapes of Wrath, which is why it's such a great book.
Speaking of interjecting, I've grown to know that you're a big fan of Shakespeare, and you try to interject his work into yours. Tell us a little bit about that and how you. I've studied some Shakespeare, and I can't remember much of anything, especially where to find a quote. How does that work for you? Because it really is entertaining.
Well, I've been lucky enough to be able to put a little bit of references to Shakespeare into just about all my books lately. I've just finished. I'm working on one now, and they just put a quote in there yesterday about Shakespeare. I kind of integrated into the text, but he was the greatest writer, and his command of the language was just so fascinating and so vast. So many of his sayings that he came up with, and this is going back to the 300-400 years ago, that he came up with are still used today. For instance, the Heart of Gold, that's from Henry V. Fair Play is from The Tempest. Break the Ice, Taming of the Shrew. The Game is Afoot. Everyone thinks that's from Sherlock Holmes, but it's actually from Shakespeare, Henry IV. I'm sorry, Henry V. But there's so many, even Knock Knock, Who's There? That's actually from Shakespeare, from Macbeth, from the play Macbeth. So many of his words and his phrases are still being used today, and they're part of our language.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your inspiration for Chimes, and then also if you tell us a little bit how you set upon the location.
Well, again, I was working with an agent at the time, and he kind of wanted me to write a novel set in Washington, D.C. with a little bit of political intrigue in it. And I thought back to 7 Days in May, and I thought, I could change it and update it, which I did. And the original title we had was "Come Like Shadows," which is from Macbeth, the play Macbeth. But the problem I had was I kept working the plot, and he kept wanting me to add different nuances and different directions into it. And by the time I'd finished the treatment that he wanted, it was a total mess. And he and I eventually ended up parting company. And I kind of took a look at the manuscript that I had, and I decided I wanted to make some changes, and I kind of reworked it. And I came up with again the Washington D.C. I have a friend, in fact, he's a member of the PSWA, Quentin Peterson. He was a member of the D.C. Metro Police, and I visited him numerous times, and I kind of based one of the characters on him a little bit, the character of Kelly in the book, and I had a little bit of fun with it. I wanted to make the protagonist a veteran. He came back from the experience in Somalia with sort of PTSD, and I had him working on that, trying to solve that problem, and also then the intrigue, the political intrigue, and the idea that this rogue general is going to try to take over things. I put that into the book also. It's basically a thriller, and again, I don't think it's overly political, but there's certainly an element of that.
Well, go ahead, Sally.
Okay. You know me, I jump in when I have a question. So I do have a question, Mike. I know you've written 30 plus books, and I've only read 3 of them, but one recurring theme is the hero is unjustly accused. And that is, I moderated a panel at the Malice Domestic Conference last week, and we were talking about tropes, and the authors had taken offense at the use of that word because it has negative connotations. But the unjustly accused hero is a trope which you use really well. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, yeah, certainly. It's a theme in a lot of my work. You have to make part of making a plot interesting, I think, is you have to make things difficult for your protagonist, and then they keep getting worse and worse. there was a science fiction writer from Chicago called Aldous Boudros, and he said that he summed up plotting in the following statement. He said you have a problem, you have a protagonist, things get worse, things get worse, things get worse, things get worse. He repeated that 7 times, and he said then you have your resolution in your denouement, which is basically, I think, the theme, I think, of an unjustly accused person is certainly one that's been around for a long time. There's a theory that there are only 7 basic plots, and everything else is a reworking of those 7 basic plots. And I think one of them is the unjustly accused protagonist.
Yes. A question came in the chat. Can you explain why the title Chimes at Midnight was chosen?
Well, again, it goes back to Shakespeare, Henry IV, part 2. Falstaff, he's a character, sort of like the foil character in the play, and he's a drunkard, and he's a braggart, and he's a liar. He falsely takes the role of a hero, and then in part 1, and in the second part of the play, he ends up being exposed and he dies. And as he is on his last legs, he says, "I have heard the chimes at midnight," which means that he knows his death is imminent. And I've always been fascinated by that choice of words. Henry IV, part 1 was the first play that I read in college of Shakespeare, and I still remember the heavy hangs the head that wears a crown. That was I came across that line in the play, and it just stuck with me. And then in the second part, Chimes at Midnight, I have heard the chimes at midnight. Yeah, it just resonated with me, and so that's why I used it.
Can I come back in, Sally?
Yes. Go right ahead.
Well, we're talking about the title. Somebody mentioned covers earlier. Do you design your covers? Do you have a cover artist or some variation?
Actually, a couple interesting things about covers. I actually, first of all, I have absolutely no influence on the covers. I'm traditionally published, so the publisher handles all that. I wish I could do more to design the covers, but it's also a double-edged sword. You have to kind of know what you're doing. My very first novel was called The Killing Frost, and the publisher at the time, the editor, contacted me and says, "What are your ideas for a cover?" And I said, "Well," I said, "it's a story about this guy. He's a runner, and a lot of the stuff takes place at night. So maybe a guy running along a street at night, and there's a street light." And so they came up with this cover that had this guy running through above the trees like Superman. And they sent it to me, and I said, "This looks like a science fiction cover." And so they said, "Oh, we thought based on your suggestions, we thought you'd like it." So they redesigned it, and they did a much better. The theme was toxic dumping, and they had a oil drum with a black substance dripping out of it to form the skull and crossbones. And it was a much better cover. But the original cover, somehow it made it on the internet, and every once in a while it will crop up if I'm doing an appearance somewhere. Somebody will post that cover as one of my books. So it's kind of like a ghost that keeps following me.
All right. I like the way you work your subplots. How important are your subplots? Are subplots to all authors, but you particularly, because in this particular book, your protagonist, he has a couple of different things going on. All of them put me on the edge of the seat.
Well, I think subplots are certainly a part of it, especially in a novel. For a short story, we don't have time for a lot of subplots. But if you look at life, and it doesn't really happen like one event at the time. There's always one major event, and then other things coming in and interfering with it. So I think subplots are important. I think you have to. They all have to contribute to the overall plot. Again, making things difficult for the protagonist, and nothing is easy. And if the struggle isn't difficult, then you don't really appreciate what the protagonist has to go through.
Near the end of the book, you take us into a station. Do you visit your scenes, or you just make them up as you go along?
I try to research the places I use in the book. A lot of times that's impossible. Like I'm not going to. The book starts out in Somalia, and I'm certainly not going to make a trip over there to try to see what's going on. But but a lot of times with with the internet and books and magazines, it's I think you can kind of get a feel for a place. I visited a lot of the places that I write about, but I haven't visited all of them. And certainly, if I'm doing historical, it's difficult too. But you have to kind of I kind of use a little bit of artistic license when I'm doing it. I might take a place that's it's not really the place I'm writing about, but kind of get elements of it and put that in my writing. For instance, if I'm writing a book about the Orient or the Asia, I can always visit Chinatown here in Chicago, and you walk down the street there, and you get a feeling of the smells and the sounds and the different language. You get like a feeling that you're really there. You got to get a feel of what it's like, and put some of that into the flavor of that into your scenes. It helps sometimes.
Okay. Discounting your protagonist, who is your favorite character in this book? Or did you have
that one? Well, I'd have to definitely say Felicia. She's
Yeah,
love interest. So,
some of your readers may have had more affinity for Felicia than anybody else. So who is your least favorite? Who would you kill off? Well, you did. Who besides those that you put in the grave would you leave out if you were going to write the book over? Or could you?
I don't. I think I probably had just about everybody that needed to be in there, and I could probably leave out one of the Arab terrorist guys. I could probably combine him into two of the characters into one maybe. But I felt that I kind of needed the variety.
We have another question in the chat, Mike. It's, how do you do your plotting? Any processes or tricks that you want to share with us?
Well, plotting is for me, it's pretty much I've developed a process, a writing process. I talked about it at one of our conferences. I called it the 10 steps of story creation. The first thing I do is I'll get an idea and I'll write a sentence that kind of encompasses the plot in just one sentence. And from there, I'll take that and I'll expand it and I'll think about the characters. I'll do a character list, character background of the characters I want to use, and make like a character Bible that I have, and then and keep expanding it. Another important thing I do is I draw diagrams of different scenes at different places. For instance, if I'm going to write about a hotel and a room in this hotel where a scene is going to take place, I want to do a diagram of exactly what the protagonist will see when he opens up. The elevator doors open up. Is he going to see a hallway? Is he going to see like an office there? So I have to I kind of chart it out that way, and then I work into an outline, and I use the outline. It's pretty much scene by scene, and it's sort of like writing a first draft for me. And once I finish that, then I start writing. And now the outline isn't set in stone. It's something that I can kind of change. I usually change it about 3 or 4 times during the course of writing a book, and it helps me stay on track. It helps me when I finish writing for the day. The next day when I sit down at my computer, I know exactly where I'm at in the plot, and I can pick up from there. Sometimes I might jump ahead if I get an idea for a scene that I've already that I haven't written yet. I will do a quick sketch of that, and then I'll put it aside. I write in chronological order, so I found it's easier to maintain a momentum that way. And once I get to that scene, and especially if there's a scene I'm particularly looking forward to at the end of the book, I use that as motivation to keep going because I want to get to that scene.
So I asked the question. I'm Linda. I love your book. I think we write, I don't know, similar style. And I do some of those things. I've got pictures of everything I draw at hotels and rooms. And I guess it's just natural problem of writing a book like this is trying to keep all the characters and the subplots going along at the same time, and how when characters are going to come together and when they're not, and it takes often find it can take multiple drafts. It gets pretty tricky. I just didn't know if you had any kind of recommendations on those multiple plot lines and how when you bring characters together and how that works.
Well, again, writing is an individual process, so whatever works for you is what you should use. For me, this has been a tried and true method that I've developed over the years. And I go back to the outline again. I'll have
outline.
everything charted out, and if I know something is coming, I'll have these things charted out so that I know I can foreshadow it. It helps with to set things up. So I'd suggest maybe possibly doing an outline. Again, it's nothing that you can't modify or change if you feel that you're in the wrong direction, but it'll help to keep order. I have like a story chart that I give out at the workshop for our conference that has different steps. I have like the scene here, what plot disclosure you want, what character's point of view is going to be in, that type of thing. It helps me stay on track.
Cool. Thank you.
There's another related question. Sorry, George, I'm just cutting you right out of this whole
Oh,
program.
no, don't worry.
From Pamela, the question, Mike, is, do you get stuck on plot points or other problems as you are writing, and how do you cope with that?
Well, again, I go back to the outline. I pretty much have the plot figured out and charted out, which is not to say that I might get to a point and say, this isn't working, I want to change things. So there isn't any really easy way to do it. You just have to, with the outline, everything is kind of charted out beforehand. It's like, as I said, it's sort of like writing a first draft. And then I can kind of refer back to that and decide what I have to, if I do have to change something, I kind of look and I know exactly where I'm at in the plot and what I might have to modify.
And there's another question from John Shemra. How do you come up with your plots?
Hi, John, how you doing? I keep like an idea notebook, and I might be writing something and I'll get an idea. This might be a good idea for a plot, and I'll write down a quick summary on a couple lines just describing the idea that I had, and I maintain this notebook. And I may be working on a project and get an idea for something that I might not write for a long time, but I'll just have all these things written down in a notebook, and one idea per page. And then as I'm writing or working on something, I might get an idea. That idea I had before, I get another variance on that. So I'll just go to that particular page and write down some more notes. So I kind of maintain that. It's an idea notebook.
Back to you, George.
Oh, darn it. I was going to ask you about the always asked questions, pantser versus plotter, but you've answered that one. I have a notebook that I carry with me, but not nearly as detailed as you. But characters, how do you name your characters, especially after all of the books you've written?
That's a really good question, and I have a big problem with names. One of the reasons I mentioned I keep a list of characters for a character Bible when I start a project, and one of the reasons I have a tendency to repeat names. When I first started writing, I'd be writing a book and I'd have a character, and I'd say, what kind of name is this person? I tend to repeat the name Jim for some reason, and I said, okay, this Jim is doing this, and then as I get, it's a minor character in the story, and then as I get farther on, I'll be working, and I'll need somebody to come in this scene and do such and such. And I said, wow, what could this character's name be? Jim, that's nice. So I tend to repeat the names. So one of the reasons with a character Bible that I use it is to avoid doing that. And also, you don't want to have characters with similar names. I try to avoid similar sounding names, or even names that begin with the same letter. For instance, if I have a character named Ken, I would have to avoid using Keith as another character because they both start with the same letter, because it can confuse the reader. Oftentimes, you have to be particularly careful with the names that you choose. And sometimes I name them after people I've known. I put people in the book. In fact, I got a special role for a guy named George. I'm going to put.
I got a question for George. I don't know how to, my first Zoom, really, I don't really know how to transcribe or ask questions. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can hear you.
go right
Go
ahead.
All right, because I just wanted to first of all introduce George. I wanted to introduce myself to Mike because hopefully I'll be meeting him soon. Mike is Bill Soldado talking. We talked a couple times. Can you hear me, or am I messing up?
You kind of faded out for just a little bit. So, but I do remember your name and we emailed, I think, right?
Yeah, I wrote the book under too long, and I just saw
Right.
about PTSD. I do address it, and I guess I'm not, I know my time.
Bill, you're doing something that's causing your voice to phase out.
Okay, hold on. What did
There,
I?
you're perfectly clear right there.
Okay, I'll leave it right there then. Yes. Anyway,
Okay,
I
Nope.
no.
no,
Hold on. I'll go outside. Maybe I'm in Charleston, and for whatever reason, it appears the reception is lousy. Oh, so let me go outside here.
While Bill's moving,
Yeah.
let me apologize for the occasional pounding. We're going to put our house in the market and we have windows going in, but they've agreed to stop the knocking and pounding for a half hour.
I don't know if I moved. Can you hear me now?
yes,
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Mike, I just got off the phone with Steve, and I'm not because we will get together soon because I'm going to be heading up there. But I really, the PTSD issue is very important to me. I wanted you to elaborate more on it, or you just were you involved in it at all, or was it just that you mentioned it?
Yeah, Bill worked undercover for a long time, and he was experiencing PTSD, and that just hearing about some of your experiences, I really feel for you. I was, like I said, I saw when you're a police officer or military veteran, you see a lot of things that really can be traumatic and hard to get through. I used to tell when I was a training officer, I used to tell the rookies that I'd train, I'd say, you're going to see a lot of things that are going to break your heart. And I said, you have to kind of develop an insulation against them. And a lot of things can really affect you. So that's some of the things that you see and you experience. And you have to have ways of dealing with that. And what a lot of times they don't teach you in the police academy is these things, even if you get through it at the time, it has kind of a residual effect on you that it comes back later and it hits you. Old ghosts that come back in your dreams. I think anybody that's been there has experienced that.
Actually, I saw such. The book is my therapy. So about undercover experiences from 9/11 to other situations. But anyways, I just wanted to see you, meet you, and say I'm heading up that way and taking your advice on Midway and everything. And Stephen Booth said to say hi. And
Okay. Well,
and
stay strong. Stay strong, brother.
Section, I'm just gonna, because I will do plan on coming out to Vegas, like I said. Okay.
Great.
All right. I thank you. I'm gonna just sit here and listen now.
Bill's question has triggered another one from Pamela about PTSD. And she says, do you use trigger warnings for your books, Mike? And how do you feel about them?
Trigger warnings. I'm not sure exactly what she means about that.
Pamela, you want to clarify that? I think it's kind of, warnings on the book that the book contains certain.
I'll give an example. So I have a manuscript that's unpublished, but it's been suggested that since a dog is injured, or in this case killed, I was told I had to kill him off screen, like that. It couldn't be in the book. Nobody would like my book if I killed a dog. And I did change it, but I'm wondering if I still even need to warn people there's a animal death referred to in the book. That's what I mean. There are these, like if there's rape in the book, somebody who's been raped might be triggered by reading the book. So there's like this, I don't know if you guys haven't heard about it. Maybe it's not something I have to worry about, but I thought you had to be concerned about warning people if you cover a topic that could upset them, I guess.
So you're basically talking
Crazy
about having a
concept.
warning.
I know, I apologize for it, but that I'm wondering, because people are telling me, have you ever heard anything about that?
You're basically saying you should put like a warning on the book saying that this book contains scenes that may be upsetting or something like that.
Right. I think often I think it's the publisher who decides to do that, but I'm not published. I know not much about it. I just had a conversation with a professional about whether I should have that dog killed. And one way to cope with it is to put a warning. But if you put the warning, less people would read your book in the first place. You know,
I think there are a lot of
so
different,
right.
for what I've seen, there's a lot of ways, Pamela, so first is if you're writing in a genre that's, got murder and mayhem, you have to be, I think, less concerned. Like Lee Child doesn't have him on his books, right? They're about some of them are as violent as you can get. But if you're writing a cozy, I think first, one thing is also dogs. So people somehow care more about dogs and children than anybody else, right? So like, God, don't kill a dog, but you can, do whatever you want to another guy, a terrorist, or, so the other problem is if you put it in your, if you put it in your publishing, like in the Amazon book and say, I have, this book's only appropriate for over 18, then they'll flag you as like erotica in this like erotica. You don't want to do that. Either don't do that, because like then they'll treating you like you're have explicit your book, and you'll like basically can't advertise. And so it's a very tricky problem, I think. And some people probably go extreme one side and the other. I had one review of one person that said my book was violence, but it's not super graphic. And they said it, couldn't handle it because of that. But I think a lot of it, anyway, that's my opinion. But I've read a lot about it and thought about it as self-published author, that I don't put them on mine because I hope by the description, the categorization, it's a thriller. If you like, James Rollins and people like that, I know if you like that, you like my book, that people will know. I don't know. That's an answer, but it's tricky. It's tricky.
Thank you.
Well, James Rollins is actually a veterinarian too, isn't he? So,
Yes.
the rule of thumb is you should never kill an animal or a child in your book. And the reason for that is simple. A lot of people, it's going to turn a lot of people off, and you have to know your audience, and you write to the audience has a certain expectation when they pick up a certain type of book of what's going to occur. Now, for me, it was a book about, I think about screenwriting called "Don't Kill the Cat," which basically said, should avoid scenes like that. And I think, you carry that over to scenes of brutality and other stuff that it could be, that you are going to turn people off too, if you get to a certain degree of brutality in your book or sexuality or whatever. You have to know your audience. You have to be careful of that. So I don't know exactly what the story entails, but certainly I wouldn't put anything graphic in there detailing the thing. Maybe if you are going to do it, then maybe relate that the animal was killed off screen, certainly. But maybe think about reconsidering it. Maybe the dog was severely injured and taken to the vet. Anyway, it's your book, so you have to decide what's best for you. But you're gonna, you have to write to the audience expectations, and you also want to keep in mind that if somebody reads something that they consider particularly offensive, for instance, a child or an animal being killed, they may not be tempted to finish your book, and they may not be tempted to buy your next book. So we have to keep that in mind.
I'd just like to say one thing. If we went by this, none of us would have watched or seen Old Yeller.
Oh.
Right? I mean, Old Yeller is one of my favorite movies, and I cried my eyes out. But what a wonderful ending! I don't know. To me, maybe everybody's just a little too sensitive. But anyway, that's all I have to say. That's what came to my mind when I thought of a dog getting killed. And we've read stories like that when we were kids, and we survived. I don't know.
I remember seeing Old Yeller, and I cried too. And to this day, I would never want to watch that movie again.
Yeah, you know how it ends.
And let me get the title right. Where the Red Fern Grows. We grow to love a pair of dogs, and we lose them. You have to write what you want to write. And I apologize for interjecting my thoughts here. In my second and third books, I kill dogs. I'll never kill a child. and I'm done killing dogs. But if if you're reading, except for my first book, I'm pretty much dark urban crime, and bad things are going to happen. And I don't care for cozies, I'll be honest with you. And I'm reading one from a friend of mine, and it's torture for me. But it's one of the most popular genres out there. Anyway, let's get back to Mike. And this discussion, that's what I like about a book club, when you start getting folks coming in. And I see a lady from the East Coast who is a PSW member, and she's using somebody else's name. And I bet if we point at her, she'll ask a question, because I'm going to embarrass her if she doesn't.
It's Darlene, right?
Yep. You're muted, Darlene.
You're muted and your name tag says Sally.
She's undercover.
Oh, how did she get my name?
I don't know. I signed on, and that's the first time that's ever happened to me. Of course. I loved your book, Mike. It was very good. I love the ending. I enjoy a happy ending. And I did like your character, Felicia, very much, more than your protagonist. But a question, your writing process, as far as time you spend, when you spend it.
You kind of faded out in the last part of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out your writing process, what time you set aside, that kind of thing.
I'm still not getting, you said my writing process and
The time you spend, what time do you spend on it? When and how do you allocate your time?
oh, okay, my time. Okay. It varies on, I try to write every day. My goal is to write 2 pages a day. And at the time, there gotta be days when you don't really feel like writing, but you have to. I'm working under a couple of deadlines right now, so I have to produce words, and I have to produce so many a week in order to meet my deadline. And in fact, I just got an email from the editor this morning asking me, how's this book going? So again, my goal is, my advice is to write every day, even the days you don't feel like writing, and make it your goal to write 2 pages. And at the end of those 2 pages, if it's absolutely crap that you can't, this is not working, then stop. But sometimes you can, if you start writing, you can kind of write yourself into the mood of writing, and you'll say, well, this isn't half bad. I think we're going to continue. And you might be able to do up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 pages. So, but if you do 2 pages a day, and you set that as your goal, then you look at the end of a year, you're going to have a complete novel. So that's my advice. Write every day, even if it's just a couple pages, and even if you don't feel like writing, force yourself to sit down and knock them out. And 2 pages is not going to take you a long time. And if you set that as your goal, you'll have a finished project in no time.
One other question. What's your favorite genre?
My favorite genre, well, I would have to say mystery thriller. That's why I grew up reading Sherlock Holmes and Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, John D. MacDonald, Ross MacDonald, Sue Grafton and Sarah Paretsky. I knew both of them, and well, Sarah's still around, but they both gave me excellent advice in writing. And mystery, I think, is a classic genre, because you have to not only have interesting characters, but you also have to have an interesting plot. And I think that it's one of the most complex genres to write, and it's also one of the most gratifying. With thrillers, it's basically the same thing. You have to have an engaging character, and it's not so much the mystery of a puzzle to be solved in a thriller. It's more of an event is going to happen, and the protagonist has to prevent it. And so you're sort of fighting against the clock. But I think those two, mystery and thriller, are my favorites.
Thank you.
Lynn, I noticed you went unmuted. Did you have a question? Nope.
Who? Sorry, me or somebody else?
Lynn,
Linda,
Oh, Lynn. Sorry, Linda. Sorry.
did you have a question?
Oh, I suddenly went unmuted, but I didn't unmute myself. So, I'm not sure how that happened. I'll mute myself back except to say, great on mystery thrillers.
There's there's another question in the chat. How do you gather knowledge on specifics where you perhaps had no firsthand knowledge, Mike? For example, Black Ops missions, White House operations, etc.
Research is key, and I enjoy doing research. I love doing research. In fact, when I'm doing research, I usually get a couple more ideas for some more stories. But you can find an awful lot of stuff on the internet, which is kind of dangerous because a lot of it isn't true. What I try to do is I've had a lot of experiences in my life, and I try to base a lot of it on that. I'll talk to people that have done some of these things if I can, and I read a lot of nonfiction. Stories about Black Ops. I've read several books on that were written by some of the best of the best in our military. Charles Beckworth and Bull Simons. They both written up extensively about their military careers and their experiences with Delta Force and the Sante raid in North Vietnam. Bull Simons. He also did. There was also a book about him back when the Iranian Revolution was going on in I believe it was 1979, 78 or 79, when they took over the city and the Revolutionary Guards and everything was in chaos. Simons and he took a bunch of civilians over there and they rescued some oil employees that were trapped in Tehran, and they brought them back. It's called Wings of Eagles, On Wings of Eagles. It was a fascinating book, and it just his mind process, the way he worked and the way he thought things through, was just fascinating.
Well, I have a question that I need some help with. In my current manuscript, I felt as though I had just the right number of characters, and then I did a spreadsheet and I found that I had 23, which is way too many. So I'm going to have to kill some off or cut them. How do you keep track of the number of characters in your books?
Well, yeah, I'd suggest bumping a couple off, but anyway, make sure they deserve it. I go back to the character Bible. As I'm writing the outline, I'll come characters and I'll keep a list of the names and different things, what characteristics they might have. So it's a good way to keep track of things, and you can also kind of look at that and determine if it's unwieldy. If you have too many characters, they're going to get confusing to the reader, because the reader's going to say, okay, who is this guy? So you have to kind of balance it, I think. And character Bible is a great way to do that. It's easy to maintain, and it's a great way to make sure you don't repeat the names that sound alike or that are alike.
To go a little step further on that, when you introduce characters, most of you, not most of them, but many of your characters, when you introduce them, in a way you promise the reader that you're going to learn something more, or they're going to have a part to play. How do you work that?
Well, I think it's important to realize that when you're writing, whether it's a short story or a novel, basically every word has to advance the plot in some way. So it follows that if you're introducing a character, then that character is going to have to play a part in some fashion in the plot as it unfolds. If you introduce a character that has no purpose other than just to be there, then it can be distracting, and the reader's going to go back. Well, what did this guy do? What was his purpose here? After they finish it, they're going to say this guy was introduced in chapter 3 and he never appeared again, or So I think you have to be careful. And again, I go back to the outline and the character Bible as guides that you can use. Now, if you have 23,
I want to say one
I'm
thing
sorry.
about your characters. I loved them. I thought you did such a great job showcasing how their backgrounds made them who they were, like their individual prejudices and the way they see the world and the language that they use. And your audiobook, I don't know if I've listened to the audiobook, the narrator was just phenomenal. So anyway, it was just really awesome. I really, really thought your characters were great. Your plotting was great.
Oh, thank
It's a
you.
great book.
I've never been able to listen to any audio versions of my books because I think when I write it, you hear it a certain way, and then when someone else reads it and interprets it, if it's not the way you intended it, it can be offsetting. So, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay. You mentioned that you're fighting a deadline, and it looked like you looked up at the clock. What's in the future for Mike Black? What are you working on now? And what do you envision once this deadline is passed?
Unfortunately, I'm working on the it's reversed, but anyway, I'm working on a series called Trackdown. I've written 7 books in the series, and now a couple months ago they wanted me to do number 8, and it was unexpected. And I was actually working on another project, and I have to get that one done within the next month. And I also before I got the contract for that one, I got another offer to do a Western series, a modern Western series about a Texas Ranger. And that one is going to be under one of my pseudonyms. And so I have to get that one done also. So I'm kind of balancing, working on both at the same time. I've done this before, written 2 books at the same time, and it's challenging, but if you maintain your discipline and you're got things pretty well figured out as far as the plots, it's doable. But that's where I'm at right now. I got 2 books due relatively soon, within the next month or so, and then I've got 2 other books in the Texas Ranger series that are due after that.
Okay. Several of my author friends happen to be female and use their initials, like G.D. Kramer, because of the old bias against female writers. Along those lines, you mentioned your pseudonyms. You've used a number of them. Can you tell us why and how they come about? Because you're certainly, if you can't tell, Mike is a big man, and I don't think he worries about anybody. So how about your pseudonyms?
Well, actually, I didn't really have any influence on the pseudonyms I use. I was hired to write for hire in both cases. A.W. Hart was a house name that Wolfpack has, and I wrote several westerns under that name, and I'm doing the Texas Ranger series under that name also. A.W. Hart, H-A-R-T. The other one I written under was Don Pendleton, which was the Executioner series, and that was he was actually the originator of the series, and he started writing the books in, I believe the first one came out in 1969. And the character of Mac Bolan, he was an urban vigilante who was fighting the organized crime. And then each book would go to a different city, and each title had a different city's name in it, like the Chicago Wipeout or the Caribbean Kill or whatever. And he continued writing the books through the 70s and 80s, and then even the 90s. And then in the mid 90s, he became ill, and he sold the franchise to Harlequin Books. So they started hiring ghostwriters to write under his name, to write more in the series. And eventually I became one of them.
So I know, and now everybody here knows you've got a few AKAs. If I'm a fan of Michael Black, how do I learn or know about these others? Do you print the names out somewhere for us easily?
Well, I had a website at one time, and I got hijacked. I haven't gotten around to trying to do another one. I had a lady was doing the website registration and update for me, and she has a particularly traumatic experience, and she forgot to renew my domain name, and somebody bought it. I think they're in China, and they said they wanted like $8,000 for me to get the name back. So I was so frustrated by that. I've been remiss in doing it, but I really should. As far as listing as far as the books I've written under other names, my name is listed in those books as a contributing person in the forwards. So if you do find a copy of one of them, an executioner or an A.W. Hart, you can always look up to see who the actual author is. And they list the actual author's name in there. But other than that,
I just entered the 3 names in the chat for everybody: A.W. Hart, Don Pendleton, Michael Black. Is there another?
that's it, I believe. Now, Don Pendleton, there's like 400 books in that series. I've
Oh,
only written 11 of them. So.
wow. Well, if you send them to me, I can email them to the group. If you send, like just cut and paste a copy, then the titles of the books that you wrote under those names, I can send them out to the.
I'll certainly do that. I'll send you my publishing history.
Perfect.
I'm going to give you a hint here, Mike. There used to be a television series that I really liked, Homicide: Life on the Street. And one of the stars was Richard Belzer, right? And you co-wrote a book with him.
Right. I actually did 2 books with him. I was approached by Martin Greenberg. He said he wanted to. I was originally approached by him to ghostwrite a book for another celebrity, and I signed a non-disclosure, so I can't say who it was, but I ended up doing quite a bit of work on that, a treatment and sample chapters, and then the celebrity lost interest in the project and just dropped everything. So, but I was remembered by Greenberg, who was working with at the time he was working with Belzer trying to get a novel written, and they wanted a novel with Richard as a character in the book, and they gave me all that. So we worked it out. I met him in New York, and turned out we got along fabulously. He was a great guy. He loves dogs, and he brought his dog with him to the restaurant. We met in the Algonquin Hotel, which is a very famous hangout for literary types in New York City. And I was waiting for him and kind of nervous, and he walks in, and he had these 2 dogs with him. And as soon as he walked in, everybody's, "Oh, Richard, how you doing?" And he let the dog just run loose in the restaurant, and people giving him scraps of food and putting down the waiters are putting down bowls of water for him. And I was just stunned by this. And he said, "Oh yeah, I bring my dogs everywhere." And he was just we got along really well. And we talked about the book, and I ended up writing that book, "I Am Not a Cop," which was the title that they wanted. And then the second one was "I Am Not a Psychic," which was set. The first one was set in New York, and the other one was set in Las Vegas. At the time I met him, I said, "Can you get me on the show?" He was on Law and Order Special Victims Unit at that time. And I said, "Can you get me on the show? I'd like to play a homeless man or something." And he says, "Oh yeah, I'll do that." So, but unfortunately, they'd shut everything down for a writer's strike, so I couldn't do it. But so I missed my big chance, I guess.
There is another question in the chat. What was it like being a policeman who quotes Shakespeare? Not my typical stereotype of a real world cop. I apologize. That's from Linda.
Well, I try to keep my quotes down quite a bit when I was working, but when I was in the Army in basic training, they called me the Professor. It was my nickname. So, but I've always, like I said, I've always found ways to interview Shakespeare and just about everything. So I'd slip I used to do my roll calls that were kind of famous because I'd always add a little bit of extra training in there, and I'd certainly mentioned the Bard from time to time. But I would, like for instance, if I had a host a roll call on before the shift started on Veterans Day, I would go into the history of Veterans Day and different things. Martin Luther King's birthday, I would talk about Dr. King's accomplishments, different things like that. I always try to include a little bit of extra culture in my roll calls.
Okay. Well, Mike, I'm going to turn the tables a little bit on you here. So far, none of us have been able to stump you. So I hope this is a little more difficult. In thousands of interviews that I did and interrogations that I did over the years, I always finished up with this question for the suspect. If you were conducting this interview, is there a question you would ask that I didn't ask you that I should have? And I hope I haven't confused you.
Okay, well, I have to say that if I were sitting on the opposite side of the table and I was a suspect, I would be kind of stumped by that, one, George.
Well, I'm making you the interviewer. What would you ask Mike Black about his work?
Well,
I have a winner.
I don't know. I talk to myself quite often sometimes, but I try to avoid asking myself difficult questions.
Mike, besides being a wonderful author, is also a wonderful member of the Public Safety Writers. And he puts on our conference every year and he selects panels. And I can tell you folks right now that I expect payback in July from Mike for that question. We're getting close to time, aren't we, Sally?
Yes, we are. It's exactly 12:59, 58 on my computer.
So folks, anybody want to make that last question?
Mike, what made you start writing when you were in law enforcement? This is Bill.
Oh, Bill, I've been writing all my life. Like I said, I started writing in grammar school, and I just continued all my life. I was just been writing, recording things, journaling. So that basically,
If you did anything with the Texas Rangers, I worked with them a little bit, like many other agencies. But when I was done recording my undercover op, I always ended with, "My work is done here, my friends," from the Lone Rangers back in the 50s.
yeah.
So it was kind of a play on that, but it got everyone's attention who might have been falling asleep listening. So, anyways, it was awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
With that, I'm going to go back to Sally.
Okay, well, next month we're reading your book, George, Robbers and Cops.
Cool.
So I'm looking forward to that. I have downloaded it on my Kindle and I'm ready. So we hope to see everybody next month. Michael, thank you so much. This has been great. It was really nice to spend time with you online. And I'm coming to Las Vegas in July. So I look forward to meeting you guys in person. And to everybody else, this program has been recorded and I will be downloading the recording to our YouTube channel, our Sisters in Crime YouTube channel. So if you have any questions, I had put my email address earlier and I will add you all to the Sisters in Crime mailing list so that you can learn about our other programs when they come up. So at this point, I'm going to end our recording. And again,